The US could lift sanctions on Russia in exchange for a nuclear arms reduction deal. That's what Donald Trump said during his first interview with the British media since winning the US presidential election in November. Trump said, quote, "Let's see if we can make some good deals with Russia," adding that in his opinion, nuclear weapons should be reduced. All right, RT's Anastasia Cherkina now joining me live from London with more details on the latest Trump interview. Anastasia, good to see you. A possible lifting of sanctions in exchange for a nuclear arms reduction deal. It seems that Trump is quickly starting to tackle some major issues then.
Well, Rory, indeed. In his first ever UK exclusive interview to The Times, Donald Trump did in fact talk about the lifting of sanctions on Russia in exchange for a nuclear arms deal. And we have to say that, of course, last year Russia did suspend its nuclear deal with the US, citing the US sanctions against Russia over Ukraine as the reason. At the time, we do know that Russia said the threat to strategic stability posed by the hostile actions of the US against Russia and the inability of the U.S. to deliver on the obligation to dispose of excessive weapons plutonium under international treaties were what forced Russia's hand. But, you know, speaking of this, we have to keep in mind that, of course, outgoing U.S. President Barack Obama also did talk lots and lots about resetting ties with Russia, the so-called famous перезагрузка, and obviously this is not how things have played out. So we're going to have to wait and see if these indications become actual promises. Now, it's important when it comes to this interview where Donald Trump did certainly seem to be favorable towards Russia in many ways and much more sympathetic, of course, than the outgoing Obama administration. The media headlines, of course, did their job as usual. Some of the headlines include Trump condemns Russian military campaign in Syria and says Putin's nuclear arsenal should be reduced, sort of playing it out like he was condemning the Russian president, moreover than indicating that things are likely to see a thaw. Now, we have to say that, of course, another important topic of discussion was the issue of the state of the EU. Donald Trump did point out that he does favor Brexit and that he does foresee similar actions around the EU. He was quite critical of Angela Merkel's policy toward immigration. He did say that that's what caused Brexit and that the issue of more and more people coming to the EU is certainly a burning one, and he did call that a mistake of hers. And certainly hailing Brexit, this is what Donald Trump had to say. Let's take a listen.
I think Brexit's going to end up being a great thing. People don't want to have other people coming in and destroying their country. I thought the UK was so smart in getting out.
And of course, another thing that Donald Trump had become famous for in this past week was talking about fake news at his first ever press conference. And this is something that he touched upon again in this interview, where he basically said he expects an apology about the compromising fake news that were released on him in the now notorious dossier that was highly publicized in the media last week.
All right, RT's Anastasia Cherkina, thank you. Now, Donald Trump also criticized NATO in his latest interview. He reiterated his claims that the alliance is obsolete and failing to effectively fight terror. His stance on NATO could have implications for relations with Moscow. Russia views as hostile the long-term NATO military games close to its border. And just last week, America deployed the biggest number of soldiers in Europe since the end of World War II as part of Operation Atlantic Resolve. Over 3,000 American troops arrived in Poland, almost 3,000 tanks and other armored vehicles there as well. The operation has been praised by NATO, which has released videos of families and children welcoming the troops, though there also have been plenty of protests. We discussed the president-elect's stance on NATO and his view on relations with Russia with several political analysts. Here's what they had to say.
What I like about it is that he stated in very clear language that the NATO organization is obsolete, that it's very old, that it was built and designed a previous era that no longer exists. And also in the interview, he talked about how it was ineffective. It was not geared to today's challenges, today's security challenges, globally or in Europe. So he's making some statements which, from my perspective, he's stating the obvious. And what's radical about it is nobody does that. So it's very exciting.
From a strategic point of view, very smart politically by Donald Trump to mention the nuclear arms issue. And this is really sort of a big set piece, one that was really prominent during the Cold War years and was used to great effect. You're not going to get much opposition domestically or internationally from a reduction in nuclear arms. I think generally the public see that as a positive thing, no matter who you're polling on that issue. So it's a way of diffusing some of the anti-Russian rhetoric and hysteria that's kind of taken over U.S. politics at the moment, and sort of put a damper on that, and then move things into a more constructive bilateral diplomatic direction.
And renowned journalist, filmmaker and author John Pilger also gave us his view on the future of U.S.-Russia relations.
All the noises he's made suggest that he wants to do a deal with Russia. That makes a lot of sense from everyone's point of view. There's a great deal of pressure on him not to do that. He seems to be resisting it. But all this is speculation. Isn't it a disgrace that in 2017 we're all held to hostage to what the President of the United States is about to do, when in fact the world is changing? We all know it's nonsense. They know it's nonsense. The people asking the questions know it's nonsense. The people who are running the utility in Vermont knew it was nonsense. And it was one of those rare times the Washington Post had to say, "We've just published nonsense."
It was just the other day that Donald Trump was doing his first U.S. press conference as the U.S. president-elect. How has it got, John, to the stage where the president-elect is calling CNN, a respected news outlet, a terrible organization and, quote, fake news?
I think the fact that he called CNN a respected news outlet is the most extraordinary thing. I wouldn't regard them as a respected news outlet. Since I've been a journalist during CNN's time, I've never regarded them as respected. I've always regarded most things they've said as extremely doubtful. I'm not sure what Trump is, but he worries them because they didn't get their woman in place. He worries them because he doesn't come from inside that milieu. Trump is actually the embodiment of modern, powerful America. But that still puts him outside the State Department, outside the CIA, even outside his own party. And what worries them most of all is that he might recklessly go around the world and make peace with countries like Russia. Well, Europe has become a kind of obsequious, hasn't it? I mean, to see the European Parliament in Strasbourg, which once came up with some quite good liberal initiatives long ago, to see it trying to copy this anti-propaganda legislation, laying down rules of what is truth and what isn't truth, is really pathetic.
My final question to you. If you could send one message to the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump for his next years in the White House, what message would you send to the U.S. President-elect?
Leave the rest of the world alone. Leave it alone.
A Russian-dubbed version of a new, highly anticipated episode of the British crime drama series Sherlock has been leaked online before its first official airing. The BBC, which owns the rights to show Sherlock, says it will carry out a full investigation. However, some already believe they know who was behind the leak.